Well, hi everyone. So for the past couple weeks, Melissa did doctor's opinion, and we are just going in order. And today we get to Bill's story. So when I was reading it one time, I saw that Bill tried 10 things that didn't work and then found the thing that ultimately did. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the illness stuff because I want to get to the really good stuff, right? The miracle part. So if you have your big book, Bill's story opens on page 1, and he talks about going to war. He says, "At last, I was part of life at last. And in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor." Later on, he says, "I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. I was lonely and again turned to alcohol." So I realized I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Janet B. I'm a recovered compulsive eater and bulimic, and now happy to be here and back to Bill. So Bill says, right, I was part of life at last. In the midst of excitement, I discovered liquor. And then he says, I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. I was lonely, again turned to alcohol. So here's a couple of things that didn't help him. One, changing circumstances. Things were really bad, and that's when he turned to alcohol, right? When he was lonely. And then he said, I was part of life at last. It was hilarious, exciting, and I discovered alcohol. Things were good. So if we think that changing our circumstances is going to help us recover, it probably won't. Imagine someone with cancer saying, I think I'll move from New York to LA. That will make my cancer cells stop multiplying. But of course it doesn't, right? We take our illness with us. So the second thing Bill says, I forgot the strong warnings I heard from people. That's interesting, right? Like when I was little, I was taught to look both ways before crossing the street. You know, my mom said something to the effect that if you don't, you'll be roadkill. I remembered that, and I still remember that, and I still look both ways before I cross the street. Or, I had pneumonia once. The doctor says to get over pneumonia, make sure you take this pill and this inhaler and, all that. You better believe I remembered how to do it because I like breathing. But something as important as alcohol and the dangers of it, Bill forgot the warning. And why? How could he forget that? And we've talked about it before, and we'll go into it when we really dig into step one. But basically for us, the connection between our memory, and that's where, people warning us, the results of bad behavior, and our conscious mind where we make our decisions, it may work. Remembering to look both ways before we cross the street. Remember to take your penicillin. But when it's remember that you said you were going to have one and you ate the whole box. You said you were going to have one drink and you drank the whole, I don't know, gallon, bottle, whatever liquor comes in. That doesn't make it across. Those memories don't make it across to our conscious mind where we make our decisions. Bill couldn't remember. He couldn't remember that. So people said alcohol is bad for you. But that warning couldn't make it across to his conscious mind. Strong warnings of other people never did it for us. So here's Bill. He goes to war. He comes back from war. He goes to law school. And what happens to him? He says, at one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. So I went to law school, and in a lot of classes, 100% of your grade is based on how you do on that one final exam. That's it. One exam, that's it. So this is pretty important. And Bill says, I couldn't. So I would say number three that didn't help him is necessity. Bill needed to be sober when he took his final exam, and he couldn't. Necessity doesn't help. I mean, if we say, well, I need to lose weight so I can fit into that nice dress when I go to the wedding next month. I need to lose weight because the doctor said my blood pressure is too high. I need to stop making myself throw up because I'm damaging my esophagus. It doesn't matter. Necessity doesn't work for people like us. It works for normal people, not for people like us. So Bill finishes law school and he says, the law is not for me. He was interested in business. So there he goes. Life is good for a while. And then what happens? The stock market crashes, things get bad. But he was still okay for a little while. Um, Page 4, we hear him saying, I was determined to win again. And the next morning, I called a friend in Montreal and went to Canada. So again, he's trying that geographic. He's able to stop for short periods of time until page 5. He says, liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. See, at some point, maybe we could have stopped. A lot of us can think back to a time where they could have stopped if they wanted to. I can't. I can remember as far back as nursery school obsessing about the snacks they were giving out. I couldn't stop by age 4. But here was Bill. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. So it's like, I used to live in New Jersey and I lived like 4 minutes from the border to New York. So there it was, like one set of laws, and the roads were different in New Jersey. And when I crossed into New York, suddenly, you can't make a right on red anymore, and, things like that. Different laws, different. New Jersey to New York. Bill crossed from luxury to necessity. And once we cross that line where it's a necessity, unlike me, where I could just turn my car around and go back to New Jersey, once you cross that line into necessity, you stay there. And then we can't save ourselves anymore. We need to be rescued. It's like we're in quicksand. Can't rescue ourselves anymore. And he says things get worse. He loses his house. But then he says, I got this great business opportunity. Things are going to work. And then he says, I went on here's that word, prodigious bender. I didn't look that word up. I'm assuming the word means a really, really bad bender. He says, and that chance vanished. So here he is. And what does he do? He says, I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. So he knew his alcoholic threshold, which was 0, right? It's like we can know our sugar threshold, 0, can't have any. Bill saw he couldn't have one drink. He said, I was through. I had written lots of sweet promises before, but my wife happily observed this time I meant business. And so I did. So number 4, fourth thing he tried, commitment, really meaning business. Well, that doesn't help. Think of our poor cancer patient who started in New York and now is in LA. And his cancer cells are multiplying. And he says, I'm committed to make my cancer cells stop multiplying. It is necessary that they stop multiplying. Our hearts would break because we would know that no matter how sincere that person was, couldn't do it. Doesn't have the power. Commitment alone doesn't do it because lack of commitment isn't our problem. I mean, sometimes it is, right? People aren't willing to go to any lengths, but often there's people like the way I was. I was willing to go to any lengths. I was committed, but lack of commitment wasn't my problem. My problem was lack of power. So someone had to show me how to access power. So what happens to poor Bill? He means business, but he keeps getting drunk. And he says, I began to wonder if I was crazy, bottom of page 5, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that, lack of perspective, thinking I can do things that time and time again I should see that I don't do. I unfortunately still think I have the knees of a 20-year-old, so I'll go to the gym and I'll do some like really heavy leg presses, and I'll come home and ice my knees and not work out for a while and have to go see the orthopedic doctor because I'm not 25 and I can't work out like I'm 25. Sometimes I have a lack of perspective at the gym, but it's not dire. I rest my knees for a few days and I'm fine, but not so with Bill. Because what happens? Page 6. One day he goes into a cafe to use a telephone. Not really smart. It's like someone who's trying to get abstinent walking into a Haagen-Dazs to use the payphone, which is all the way in the back of the ice cream store. So what happens? He gets drunk. But being an addict, what does he tell himself? I'll manage better next time, but I may as well get good and drunk now. So number 5 is what I call the pillow cure. I'll do whatever I want now because I'll be able to stop tomorrow. 8 hours with my head on a pillow, and that will suddenly give me the power that I didn't have yesterday. The pillow cure, or I'll start tomorrow syndrome. It doesn't work. So, what happened to Bill the next day? That magic pillow didn't do its job. And he says, the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next day are unforgettable. Normally remorse, horror, and hopelessness convince us we shouldn't do a dangerous thing again. Probably a lot of us have had the experience of going to the beach and not putting on sunscreen because we wanted this like really nice tan. And then to our horror, instead of this cute little tan, our skin is peeling off and our faces are bright red and we have to like go find aloe. And what do? The next time we go to the beach, we put on sunscreen because we don't want to look like lobsters yet again. But for an alcoholic or a compulsive eater, remorse doesn't help. What's remorse like? It's like feeling strong guilt. It doesn't do it. Or horror, looking at ourselves gaining weight or throwing up all the time. It doesn't do it. And feeling hopeless doesn't do it. The only time hopelessness is good is if at the moment someone is hopeless and they really get it that they're hopeless for good, someone presents them with a solution. But plain old feeling, hopeless, horrified, that usually just ends up with us feeling self-pity. And my friend Roxanne said, self-pity parties usually end with a cake. Not good for us. So 2 more years, Bill goes on like this. He steals from his wife. He tries all sorts of things. He goes to a hospital. Page 7, he says, understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. Strange expression. I mean, I'm assuming he doesn't mean he had this like little goose that he was swinging over his head. I believe it means things were just fine and dandy. Bill says, I went to town regularly, even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. So 2 things here. Bill had a desire, but desire without spiritual help doesn't work, right? Anyone with cancer has a desire for her cancer cells to stop multiplying. Desire alone doesn't work. Then Bill says, this was the answer, self-knowledge. Well, self-knowledge doesn't work. Someone could know they have cancer. They could know how they got it, which people, by the way, generally don't. But let's say the person said, I know how I got cancer. I live near a toxic radiation waste site and I got the cancer. Okay, now what? Now I know why I have it. It doesn't make it go away. Self-knowledge doesn't help. In page 8, we see again, along with the remorse, horror, and hopelessness, now Bill has added loneliness, despair, and self-pity to the mix. And how does Bill describe his bottom? He says, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And he still didn't stop because here's the next thing he tried that didn't work. A first step alone does nothing. I can admit I'm powerless over food and my life unmanageable. That admission alone gets me nowhere. It just may motivate me to do the work, but a first step alone does nothing, right? Imagine going to a doctor, the doctor saying, here's the scan. It proves you have cancer. And then the person saying, okay, I get it. I really do have cancer. And the doctor saying, great, now that you've admitted you have cancer and that it makes your life unmanageable, go make your cancer cells stop multiplying. It doesn't work that way. And then number 10, fear and trembling. Bill says, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit, and then he drank again. Number 10, fear. So a doctor telling us if we don't lose weight, we're going to have a heart attack, that doesn't do it. You've probably heard me say, I'll never forget this. I met a woman once at an OA event. She was diabetic, and her doctor had told her if she didn't stop eating compulsively and lose some weight, it would affect her eyes and her kidneys. When I met her, she had a seeing eye dog because she was blind, and she was on dialysis waiting for a kidney transplant. Fear doesn't do it. And again, let's go back to our cancer patient. Someone says to her, you know, if you don't make your cancer cells stop multiplying, you're going to die. You're going to leave your kids without a mother. I mean, does the woman then say, oh, I'm glad you gave me that information, and now I'm really scared. Okay, now I'll make my cancer cells stop multiplying. That never happens because fear doesn't do it. Fear isn't from God, so it can't help. So here's poor Bill. He's tried everything, and he says, everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. But then look at the turn of the story. He says, how dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch, my last binge. I was soon to be catapulted. I love that word catapulted, not I took myself. I was catapulted. I was rescued. I was catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. And I always think of like the Wizard of Oz when it goes from black and white into color. So before he had loneliness, despair, and self-pity. And what does he have now? Happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Because just like this illness is progressive, recovery is progressive. Once we get into recovery and start living this way of life, it just keeps getting better. So let's find out how it happened, how God launched his search and rescue mission for Bill Wilson. So it's November, close to Thanksgiving. Bill's drinking in his kitchen and he's thinking, how am I going to keep drinking? And the phone rings. It's an old friend he used to drink with asking if he could come over. Now, Bill was living in New York at this time. His friend did not live in New York. It had been years since his friend had come to New York, but his friend Ebby just happened, I say with air quotes, just happened to be in New York. And he just happened to call Bill and say, hey, Bill, can I come over? And Bill, he didn't care about Ebby's well-being. He's thinking, sure, we can drink together. Great. I don't have to drink all by myself. This is an oasis. It's wonderful. So remember, he was drinking, planning on drinking more when Ebby came. And Ebby did not knock on his door and say, Bill, you're drinking. I'll come back when you have a certain amount of time sober. And by the way, Bill didn't do that with Dr. Bob either. Dr. Bob was drunk and planning on staying drunk. So Ebby goes in the apartment, talks to him, looks at him, and Bill says, something's different. He invites him in. He pushes a drink across the table, says, have a drink. And Ebby says, no. And Bill's like, what had got into him? He wasn't himself. Of course, he didn't look like himself. He didn't act like himself. Of course not. Butterflies don't look like caterpillars anymore. Ebby had been transformed. Remember, God is not in the fix it up a little business like, you know, an old junk car lot. God is in the transformation business, caterpillar to butterfly stuff. So Bill says, yeah, okay, what's going on? And Ebby just says, I've got religion. Notice that. No sugarcoating God. But let's be clear what the definition of religion is. It's the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God. So when we say God as I understand him, it's not doorknob as I understand him or light bulb as I understand him, because the definition is the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God. Now, I might conceive of God differently than you conceive of God, but I think that we can agree that a light bulb or a doorknob is not a superhuman controlling power that can be personal to us. So Ebby didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't dummy it down so that it would appeal to Bill and give God some like pet name. He said, I've got religion. And what did Bill say? He said, I was aghast. Like, what the heck? He was an alcoholic crackpot. Now he's a religious crackpot. But like, whatever, let him rant. My gin's going to last longer than his words. But Ebby didn't rant. He just quietly said he'd been drunk, so drunk he was about to be committed for alcoholism, and two men had appeared in court and persuaded the judge to suspend his commitment. How can you do that? Can you imagine standing up before a judge, two guys walk in and say, Your Honor, wait a second. Don't sentence this guy. We'll take care of them. But one of those two men who walked in just happened to be the nephew of the judge, and he just happened to be a recovered alcoholic. And so he just said, Judge, maybe he said, Uncle, give us a little time. We know what can help him. A combination of two things. That's it. A simple religious idea. There's that word. Imagine they would use that word in court. A simple religious idea and a practical program of action. Clean house, clean up our past, help others, and the simple religious idea, believe that God can help you and try and do his will as best you can. That's it. And Ebby said the results were self-evident. It worked. 2 months. 2 months. So that means if there was someone sitting here binging today, that means, by spring, you can be helping them. And spring is right around the corner, at least here in North Carolina. Um, so here he is. And hold on. So Ebby had recovered in the Oxford group, and they didn't have the 12 steps. They had about 6 steps for a while, but they went through the basic process of surrendering your life to God, cleaning up your past, committing to help others, and living a life of service, prayer, and meditation. And it worked. So fast forward 60 days from that day in the courtroom, and here's Ebby thinking, who can I help? I'm in New York in business. Let me call Bill. 2 months, right? So Bill reports Ebby came to pass his experience on to me if I cared to have it. And he said, I was shocked, but I was interested. And then here's what he says, top of page 10. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So someone comes around and they don't feel hopeless, like, yeah, I'd like to lose 10 pounds to look good at my high school reunion. They're probably not going to stick to it when it gets difficult, when we have to make amends, when we have to inventory and look at our part, on all our resentments, when we have to wake up a little earlier to pray and meditate. But when someone's hopeless, we actually want them to feel hopeless. We don't want to tell people, oh, don't worry, it'll get better. Because you know what? It doesn't get better. I was going to meetings for 6.5 years. And when I first started, I wasn't throwing up at all. Or maybe then I started a couple times a week. 6.5 years later, I was throwing up to 6 times a day and needed major surgery on my esophagus. It didn't get better just by going to meetings. It got worse. So here's Bill, and Ebby's talking to him about God, and Bill says, well, I've always believed in power greater than myself. I often pondered these things. I wasn't an agnostic, but when it came to a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction. Isn't that a great description of God? Love, superhuman strength, and direction. I became irritated and my mind snapped shut. So he believed in God, but not in a personal God. So he was what I would say is a practical agnostic, and that's how I was. I believed in God, and it made no difference in my life. It's like I believe there's a king in England, but it makes no difference in my life. Now, if I move to the UK, it might make a difference, but it doesn't matter that I believe he exists. And I was like Bill, believed in God, but wasn't really interested in anything God might want to say to me or might want me to do. I didn't think God would have anything to say to me. So here's Bill, same position. But how did Ebby describe God to Bill? Remember, love, superhuman strength, and direction. We need all of it. If God is just power and direction, but not love, how am I ever going to feel safe with a God if he doesn't care about me? If he's got love and direction, but not superhuman strength, how is he going to overcome this illness, which is way stronger than I am? And a God who's also direction. That means he's not going to just rescue me and leave me alone. He's going to give me direction, guidance. But this is the God we all have access to. So Ebby and Bill start talking about God, and Bill says, when he's talking about religion, he says, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. And isn't that how a lot of us use the 12 steps? We do the parts that are convenient and not too hard. and then say, I don't really need to do the rest. I'm a little bit different. So Bill had to start doing some soul searching. He was saying, okay, I want to believe in God, but there's things in my way. So there were legitimate things he had to deal with. Remember, he'd been to war, and he said the war, the burnings. I mean, think about that. Burnings. Like, what did he see towns burnt down? Did he see things like people on fire? Burnings, chicanery, just people acting wickedly. He said, these things made me sick. And judging from what I've seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss. Wow. He had some legitimate things. He'd witnessed a lot of calamity and he was stuck. Like, why is there all this suffering? And it seemed like he earnestly questioned it. It's like he wanted to believe. Some of us don't want to, right? Because if there is a God, then there might be certain things we might have to do that we don't want to do, like, I don't know, stop cheating on our taxes, stuff like that. But what did Ebby do? He didn't do what I probably would have done, like get into this big theological debate about, well, does God cause suffering or just allow it? Ebby doesn't do any of that. He just says, Bill, I don't know. All I know, God is good. And when I surrendered my life to him, the obsession to drink was just taken out of me. I guess that's how I deal with certain things. Like, I don't know why God allows human trafficking. That one truly breaks my heart. Like, why doesn't God just smite all the human traffickers with, a plague? I don't know. Like, why did my dad suffer with Parkinson's? And then after my mom nursed him until his death, why did she get stricken with Alzheimer's? I don't know. And I have to be content not to know this side of heaven. Hopefully, then I will. But I don't now, and that's okay. I trust God has a plan, and it's okay if I don't understand it. So what does Ebby do? He simply tells Bill, God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. Ebby said, I had admitted defeat. And after admitting defeat, I had been raised from the dead, right? Isn't that us living in the illness, living like walking dead? And Ebby said he was suddenly taken from the scrap heap. Think of that, like a garbage dump. That's how Ebby said, I was suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best I have ever known. He was rescued from the scrap heap to a life of meaning. And he says, Bill looks at him and says, had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. On page 55, it says, deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Like, we have the idea of God inside us. We're not God, but the idea of God is in us. Um, and, and Ebby was saying, I have no power, but there was power that I was able to access. And that's all I need. I don't generate electricity myself, but I sure need to access it. And I'm not going to be foolish enough to say, well, since I don't really understand how electricity works, let's sit in the dark. And because he knows he's helpless, Bill is open-minded. And he said, maybe these religious people are right after all, because it wasn't about like churches or synagogues or anything like that. He just saw Ebby wasn't the same Ebby. He says, and I love this line, my ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. And great tidings just means good news. When we think miracles, right, we think, I don't know, Moses parting the Red Sea, things like that. And Bill was saying, okay, that's all in the past. Well and good, great for Sunday school. But here sat a miracle right in my kitchen. A man who was once one way and now is another way. Bill thought, that's the kind of miracle I can be interested in. He saw Ebby was totally different. Page 12, he says, his roots grasped a new soil. It's like he had a root transplant. He became a different person. But he's still not sure. He's a little prickly, and his friend says, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And he says, that did it. That was all I had to do. And all I had to do was be willing. Nothing more was required to make a beginning. So willing to believe in God. So what does that mean in practical terms? How can I be willing to believe something that I don't really believe? I think it can go something like this. We can say an honest prayer, always honest, right? Because if we say a dishonest prayer, God knows. But a prayer that says, God, I don't know if you exist. I hope you do, but I don't know. And if you do exist, I don't know if you care about me. But if you do exist and you do care, please help me. And in the meantime, I'm going to live my life the way I think that if you existed, you would want me to. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to help others. And I'm going to hope and pray that you're real because I have no other options. I don't think God could resist a prayer like that, right? Willingness. We can be willing to believe that there is a God who can restore us to sanity. And Bill says, I was convinced. There he is. Like, how long had Ebby been there? I don't know, half an hour, an hour? And that he went from like being a practical agnostic to saying, I was convinced God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. What does enough mean? I think it means enough to like do the work of these 12 steps, not sit there and say, okay, God, I'm willing to believe you exist. Now come out of your bottle where you exist, be my genie, grant me 3 wishes, and then go back in your bottle. We have to be willing to do this work. And how does Bill describe it? He says, at long last, I saw, I felt, I believe. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. You know, he says, before in this chapter, he says how blind I had been with scales of pride and prejudice. You can picture over one eye a scale of pride, over one eye the scale of prejudice. He says that's what was blocking him from seeing God, pride and prejudice. What's pride? Thinking too much of myself or thinking of myself too much. And what's prejudice? Thinking too little of others and thinking of others too little. He says, when I was younger, I needed and wanted God, and God came. I sensed his presence, but it was blotted out by worldly clamors. So if we want to blot God out, all we have to do is become too concerned with things, with our clothes, with our jobs, with our status, different things. Worldly clamors block us from God. So then Bill went to the hospital. Why? It said he showed signs of delirium tremors. That's why he went to the hospital, because it was physically dangerous for him not to withdraw from alcohol without medical help. And he says, right there in the hospital, I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. So it's basically something like this. God, I believe you're good, or at the very least, you can't mess up my life any worse than I've messed it up myself. Take all of me, not just my food. Take all of me. I place myself 100% under your care and direction. And then what did he do? He cleared away the wreckage of his past. And look how he describes it. He says, I ruthlessly faced my sins. He recovered in the Oxford group. They call them sins. We call them character defects. Basically the same thing. He said, I ruthlessly faced them. He was hard on himself. Being hard on ourselves gets a bad rap these days, right? Like therapists are always saying to us, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't be such a perfectionist. But he says, I ruthlessly face everything. It's okay to be hard on ourselves because we know that once we ruthlessly face these things and go to God and ask him to remove it, we're good. We're good with God. There doesn't have to be any shame or guilt, but we have to be ruthless in facing these things. And he says once he did that and he made his amends, he didn't drink anymore. That was it. He went to the hospital and that was it. And he gives us a little advice. He says, I've got this new God consciousness within. That's the promise of this program. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Common sense becomes uncommon sense. That's a result, a fruit of working this program, right? We intuitively know what to do sometimes. And it says if we're not sure, we sit quietly when in doubt, asking, that means praying, praying for direction and strength to meet our problems as God would have us. So when we're not sure what to do, before we pick up the phone and call 17 people, we get quiet and we ask God for strength and direction. And then Ebby tells him that when you do these things, you'll enter upon a new relationship with your creator and have the elements of a way of living which answer all your problems. And I think that's really the mission statement of our big book, right? To get a new relationship with our creator where he's God, I'm not, and I'm surrendered to him. And by working this program, I have the elements of a way of living which answer all my problems, my marriage problems, my work problems, my kid problems, my health problems, all my problems. This program teaches us how to deal with that. And so he tries to sum up what's necessary to recover. Belief in the power of God, not the existence of God. That's not enough. The power of God, plus willingness, honesty, and humility. Says these are the essential requirements. If we just have willingness, honesty, and humility without the power of God, then we're just doing like self-improvement work. And I didn't have the power to improve myself. I couldn't stop eating on my own. I couldn't stop being a selfish person on my own either. And then he says, okay, simple, but not easy. We have to pay a price. The destruction of self-centeredness. Remember, the root has to be destroyed. When he saw Ebby, he said his roots grasped a new soil. It's like we have to be transplanted from the garden of self into the garden of, I don't know, God and service. We need a root transplant. So Bill's in the hospital and the thought came. I love how he says it. He doesn't say, I thought. He says, the thought came. It's like God's already giving him guidance. Says the thought came, there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. Well, little did he know, but that shortly after this, about 6 months or so, I'm not sure exactly, it wasn't real long. Now, Bill is in Ohio on business, just like Ebby had been to New York on business. He's in Ohio, and the thought came to him. That thought came to fruition because he freely gave to Dr. Bob, and then they freely helped alcoholic number 3, and so on, down to us here on a Monday night. And I want to highlight bottom of page 14, one of the most critical paragraphs in the book. It says, faith without works was dead, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, not through prayer and meditation, through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots and would surely drink again, guaranteed to drink. So if I don't enlarge my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, I'm guaranteed to eat again. Now, other people may be able to enlarge their spiritual lives other ways. And believe me, I am not putting down prayer and meditation. I spend a good deal of time in it every morning. But we are people who, in order to grow spiritually, our spiritual muscle needs work and self-sacrifice for others. So Bill says, yes, I went. I did this work, but sometimes I was still plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. So it doesn't mean once we go through the steps, we're going to feel like on cloud 9 all the time. We're still going to get resentful. We're still going to have self-pity sometimes. And he says, when all other measures fail, so I'm assuming he did a 10-step and looked at his part and he prayed and meditated. So when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. It's a design for living that works in rough going. You know, I guess like there's Fords and there's Chevys, and they're made differently. Different things may cause them to run. When we became addicts, the way that we work when we're plagued with self-pity and resentment is to help others. He says it makes us feel amazingly lifted up on our feet. And then he closes with a few final things. He says, the joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. So they're telling us we can be happy even when things are hard, bad situations. Hard situations in my life don't define me. How well my kids are doing does not dictate my happiness. That's what this program gives us. He says there's scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. That's what's so beautiful about this fellowship. If we have a problem, almost guaranteed somebody in this fellowship has had the same problem and maybe even mastered it and can help you along so that when you master it, you can help them, the next person along. Page 16, last page of this chapter, he says, an alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature, but it's our job to love them anyway. That's a measure of how I'm doing spiritually. How well do I love other people? And he says recovery is fun. We're earnest, but we should have fun. Like we shouldn't be coming to meetings with long faces. We come here, it's like fun, we're together. I put my lipstick on and they say, but underneath, faith has to work 24 hours in and through us. And we don't have to look any further for utopia because we have it. What's utopia? It's an ideal. It's an ideal place. And he ends by saying, each day, my friend's simple talk in my kitchen, when he was drinking, he says, my friend's simple talk in my kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. And whenever I talk about this chapter, I always end by saying that I personally, and I think all of us are just so blessed to be part of that circle that Ebby and Bill started. And with that, I will pass.